So you went through this lengthy interrogation process in Mongolia, and then it was decided, and your mother was with you, and it was decided at that point that you were genuine refugees, and you made it from there to South Korea.
Yeah.
And was that to Seoul?
We know from Mongolia, several months interrogation, they take us to another 2 months of the interrogation at the South Korea's intelligence facility. Then they take us to 3 months of re-education program. Is
Right,
like,
and that's when they taught you how to be integrated to some degree into South Korean culture. So talk about that too. That's very interesting.
yeah, so they give us this 3 months of training periods where they introduce us to this new planet
And
where
that's
there's
once they've identified you as genuine refugees. So
exactly
then you got in that stream.
yeah. Once they're proven, sometimes they even go through those like lie detectors with other defectors. They really make sure that you're not spy and saying everything is true. Once that is proven, they put us this 3 months of training period where they tell us what bank is, right? As a North Korean, we never know what bank or ATM machine is. They tell us like how to ride a bus, how to ride a subway, you know, like the
And
South Korea.
what did you think of all that? I mean, you'd been in China for some time, so this wasn't the difference between North Korea and other countries wasn't quite as shocking, I presume. But how what was happening to you when you started to understand the massive difference between North Korea and the rest of the world, and also the fact that everything that you had been taught since you were born and everything your parents had been taught, all of that was every single bit of it was a lie. What was that doing to you?
That was the thing, like as you said. I remember they said, oh, Korean were started by Kim Il-sung, by Americans. And like in North Korea, literally they tell us Americans are bastards, they are the most evil thing, right? And at that point, my reaction was, so if everything that I believe was a lie, how do I know that what you're saying is not a lie? Right? Like, how do I ever trust ever again? And it was the hardest thing ever trusting ever. It took many years, and when I read by George Orwell's book, The Animal Farm, that's when I realized, oh, what they're telling is actually true. But until that point, I didn't trust what
So
South Koreans were saying.
why was George Orwell's book so relevant to you? Why did it have that effect? Do you know?
It's so I was reading this Animal Farm, not even knowing what that is, and it was I was seeing my grandmother in those old pigs and these young pigs. When they're like later, when those young pigs born, they don't even know what life was beforehand. They didn't even know the alternative life looks like, right? Because the first pigs were afraid to speak out, and all the terror they kept silent. So until I was reading that book, I was only blaming the Kim dictatorship because of the dictatorship that we suffered. But when I was reading that book, I could see all those people were voluntarily, involuntarily supporting in this dictatorship by terror. They were silenced, but it was their fault too that we end up in this. Everybody did something, contribute something, make us North Korea into, the perfect dystopia that we are reading in the books, right?
Contributing what? What are they
By
contributing?
by keeping silence.
But by keeping silent
Yes.
when they had
It's
something
like
to say.
exactly because when it came to me, doctor, like I didn't even know the word oppression. So if you know you're oppressed, you're not oppressed. But to me, like in North Korean young generation, we don't even know we're oppressed. What is that? But my grandmother knew. She experienced before Kim. She lived through Japanese colonialism. Like she lived through before Kim's. But because of that, their fear of losing their life and the loved ones, I'm sure they had a reason like not to speak up. But because of the fear and not standing up for the right, just now North Korea in a point where people don't even know what life can be look like.
Well, Solzhenitsyn was convinced that a totalitarian state could not exist unless everyone was participating in the lie, and that the most potent anti authoritarian action is to tell the truth. And that means to say something when you have something to say, because not because you're brave, but because the alternative is worse.
Yeah,
and it was Orwell. It's so
yeah.
interesting to me that it was Orwell that opened your eyes to that. I mean, it makes perfect sense, but it's still really something.
Yeah, I know. It's like that book. I think that's when I realized, oh, everybody was responsible. And that's when I started thinking about speaking out.
That's when you started thinking about speaking out.
Yeah.
I see. And so you made a conscious decision at that point.
Yeah. I knew
Why?
Because I knew the price of silence. Because like that was a price we were paying, right? Like not even knowing. Like that's the thing, like when people say like, why no revolutions? Like, because we don't know we are slaves in North Korea. How do you fight to be free when you don't know you're a slave? And that's a different thing. Like the fact that my people don't even know they're oppressed, that's the thing. Like what kills me to this point about my father is not like of course I would be grateful he ever lived in freedom even one day. But the heartbreaking thing is he didn't even know life could be this free and life could be this beautiful. He didn't even know that. Like life could be so different for other human beings. I just wish he knew before he goes, so he doesn't remember this life so hard, is filled with the sadness, And that's the thing with North Koreans, we are talking a different degree of oppression. They don't even know life can be this way. And yeah, so that was my time of understanding what happened and started believing in this freedom.
So you're in the re-education process in South Korea, learning to be a South Korean, learning to some degree how to fit in the culture, learning to some degree how to be free.
Yeah.
Did you start reading at that point, or when were you? For example, when did you encounter Orwell? Was that when you went to university later?
Before my university, so when I was 16, I think 16 years old.
And how did you come across the book?
It was so I was in this de facto school because I was 15 years old, almost 16 years old. They did a placement exam for me, and I just said like I don't even know the map of the world. My grade came out like 7 years old, like intelligence.
Right. So you got out of the re-education process, and then you lived. Where did you live with your mother after you left the re-education process?
They put some in like a public housing in the countryside where a lot of like mentally ill people were living.
And then that's when you decided that you were going to go back to school. Yes,
that's where I wanted to go to school. But then if I want to go to school, there's no way I can be studying with 7 years old. But even though a lot of defectors do that, they 24, they start studying with 7 years old in the same classroom. And I want to take the GED, so I would catch up quickly. And I went to special defector school where they would help us studying in a GED. And in the bookshelf, there was this tiny book called like the Animal Farm, and I picked it up because it looked very thin. Not big. I was like, it might be easy, quick read. And never knew that was the point where my life was going to be changed.
That's really something.